All right, we are ready to go.
Thank you, Joel. Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for showing up and being here present for the Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021 Planning Commission for the City of Branson. So thank you guys for your volunteer spirit for being here. And I know we have some of the staff online too, listening in and being able to help that too. So appreciate all of you too for that. So with that said, Joel or Jake, we probably better call roll here and see how we're doing with that.
Yes, I'll take roll.
Thank you, Jake.
Commissioner Romine. Commissioner O'Day. Chairperson Harris.
Here.
Commissioner Richards.
Here.
Alderman C.
Here.
Commissioner Howden.
Here.
Commissioner Pinkley.
Here.
Commissioner Lloyd.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Davis. Commissioner
He's
Nichols.
here.
Oh,
He's
he's
just
here?
muted.
Oh,
Sorry.
So let's see, is Commissioner Davis here?
He is, but we just can't hear him.
Oh, okay. So he
Can
should,
you hear me now?
There we
Oh.
go.
we got you now.
Okay.
okay.
Using a different computer.
Ah,
Whoa, congrats.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Following, Commissioner Nichols. And that is everybody.
okay, so we have 7 by my count.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you again, commissioners, for coming out this evening for our virtual meeting. And oftentimes, we always call, see if anybody has any public comment for those listening in. I want to remind everybody, you can always go to the bransonmo.gov site. There's a section for public comment. And of course, you can always call the planning department and visit with Joel or Jake about any particular item that you may have. So appreciate everyone listening in this evening that might be doing that. And with that said, Joel, I think we have some minutes that we had put together from January 5th. So hopefully the commissioners had a chance to look those over. Do any of the commissioners have any questions of Joel or Jake about the minutes from January 5th? Hearing none, then the chair would entertain a motion to approve those minutes from January 5th, 2021.
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman C. And we have a second.
Second.
I think Howden maybe. Very good. Any other questions or comments about the minutes? Hearing none, then Jake, if you would call roll to approve the minutes, that would be good.
It's just moving to approve minutes. Okay. Call movers.
So we had the movers again. Chairman Harris, I believe we had.
Oh, C rather, and I think Howden. I believe that's what I heard.
Okay. Now our open vote.
Yes, please.
Chairperson Harris.
Yes.
Commissioner Richards.
Yes.
Alderman C.
Yes.
Commissioner Howden.
Yes.
Commissioner Pinkley.
Yes.
Commissioner Lloyd.
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Davis.
Yes.
Motion is carried.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Joel, it takes us down to our public hearing items, and I think the first one has to deal with a high-density residential zoning.
That's correct. That's correct. We do have one person, so I'm going to let them in really quick
Sure,
so they can be a part of this item.
sure.
Okay, So this is a request for high-density residential HDR zoning for the property located at 189 Friendly Hills Drive, Branson, Missouri. We had been working with the applicant, Mark Kirby, for several months. However, we're working on annexation, finishing that up. We anticipate that to have its final reading next week at the Board of Aldermen. However, there's some miscommunication between the applicant and staff as to the zoning of the property. The intent of Mr. and Mrs. Kirby is to operate a nightly rental. And so we were pursuing high density residential with them. However, there's been some other things going on within the Friendly Hills subdivision that this is a part of. So he has since made it very clear that he would prefer just agricultural zoning that would allow him to both have his single family home and operate it as a nightly rental. So as a result, staff is actually requesting for this item to be withdrawn from tonight's agenda.
I see. And then most likely that'll come back to us later with the different zoning requests.
No, they actually just plan to stay with the A agricultural. And upon annexation, that's what code designates the property to be. So actually, as long as it stays agricultural, you all will not see any zoning change in the future.
Okay. And do we need a roll call vote on withdrawing that, Joel?
Yeah, I also just wanted to make note of a couple of public comments we received, just because we did receive them, want to make sure they get in the record, even though we're asking for the item to be withdrawn. We received a public comment from Sean Martinez at 271 Lenhart Drive, and he simply provided a comment that he's not in favor of the high-density residential zoning. And then we also received a public comment from Robert Drummond of 186 Friendly Hills Drive, and he provided a comment to the extent that Mr. Kirby on Friendly Hills Drive does not want to sell and the developer has no rights for eminent domain. I am opposed to the conversion of Mr. Kirby's property. So those are the two public comments we received. And as I said, again, staff's request is to withdraw this item.
Okay. Thank you, Joel. Any questions of Joel by the commissioners before we ask for a motion for withdrawal?
Yes, I have a quick one, Joel. So then on a result of this, and it's not even going to come before us then, right? On the board?
That's right. We're asking for the item completely to be withdrawn.
Okay.
So it will, if you all approve the withdrawal, it will end right here.
Gotcha. Okay.
Thank you.
I have a question of Joel.
Yes, Vice Chairperson Davis.
Joel, if this ends up being zoned agricultural, it's being operated as a nightly rental, that doesn't seem like it's a consistent or appropriate zoning.
We don't disagree with that comment. We do believe that the highest and best use for the Friendly Hills area is high density residential. However, they do have in their covenants and restrictions and have made it very clear to the Board of Aldermen that they want to maintain a single family area. I guess our biggest concern as staff is when the Majestic development was approved by the county, that really kind of, from a planning standpoint, from a zoning standpoint, showed what highest and best use would be possible out there at this location. There is a development to the east, Chateau Cove and Chateau Mountain, that is developing actively high-density residential units. That developer has annexed some property into the city recently and is continuing to try to get high-density residential zoning, and we'll see how that goes with the board. We're just following the wishes of the applicant to have his item withdrawn, knowing that through, other developments in the future or other planning efforts in the future, to possibly, resolve any conflict that may be caused by agricultural zoning.
Thank you for the answer. I would hope that our representative, Alderman C., would plan to make a statement at the Board of Aldermen meeting to educate the board as to the inconsistency of zoning and use in this case.
Yeah, me and Joel have talked about this before, and I'll definitely have something to say on the 9th.
Thank you.
So
Chairman Harris,
yeah.
this is Phil Lloyd.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I might have jumped on somebody there, did I?
That's all right. We'll get to Mr. Pinkley in a bit.
Okay, so I too I don't understand how agricultural allows you to have nightly rentals. That just doesn't add together to me either. And
Yeah.
I think we've got something to work on there in the future. I don't understand. Will we still, Joel, have those restrictions for nightly rentals that we were trying to at one time?
Yes, we actually have an item later in the agenda that is doing some code amendments pertaining to nightly rentals. As far as the agricultural zoning, the city for quite some time has carried a very simplistic approach to nightly rentals in that it's allowed in all zoning districts except for low density residential. So by default, then it's allowed in agricultural zoning. We have very few parcels within the city limits that are actually zoned agricultural. But if it's something that you would like to have us take a look at and consider revising that, we're more than welcome to do so.
I kind of think that the applicant has seized an opportunity, and I'm not really faulting that, but that's kind of how this is progressing, it looks like. Anyway, that's my concern, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Commissioner Lloyd. Commissioner Pinkley.
Thank you, Chairperson Harris. I just wanted to say that, and Alderman C can confirm this, but at that meeting where the residents who are county residents came and spoke against that annexation, actually, and the zoning itself too, the board basically said that they wouldn't support that type of zoning up against the single family development, and that they would communicate that to this committee, so this commission. So I believe that the owner's intent, if Joel can correct me on this, is that he would prefer, his intent is not to build additional structures on that site. And as a result, he wants to keep it the way it is and allow for nightly rentals to take place in a single family home. And to do that, he can do the same as the other two lots that we've already annexed, which is ag, and it'll fit. And so with that, I would make a motion to accept the request to remove from tonight's agenda.
Thank you. We have a second for the motion.
I'll second.
Okay. Was that
Alderman Davis,
Davis?
or
Thank you. Yeah,
Commissioner Davis.
thank you.
You're both, Rick.
There we go. Any other comments by the commission before we vote on withdrawing this item?
Chairperson Harris.
Yes.
So, going back on what was just discussed about when the alderman had turned this down, there were a lot of impassioned speeches. And Joel, is this the same property that we're referring to, or is it a neighboring property?
This is actually the property to the south of the two properties that were previously trying to get HDR zoning.
Right. Okay. Because, essentially they were wanting to put, 5 units on one piece of property as opposed to one. The entire board voted it down. It was kind of a moment where the citizens of that neighborhood kind of felt like they had a win. And then I went by that property about a week and a half later, and they were putting in the 5, parcels. And essentially, I was told that was basically able to be done because it wouldn't be completed and they would have to come back, but they were moving forward with construction anyway. Since then I've been told that some of the aldermen maybe have had a change of heart and that maybe they would, change the zoning. But man, there's just seems to be, we get run around quite a bit. And if we're looking at sort of developers acting in good faith, well, if they're doing something like that and trying to do everything they can to use agricultural or use, the zoning that we have, then I don't see them acting in good faith on that. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Howden. Anyone else?
I'll try to address some of that.
Okay.
I've been down there recently myself. Now, I haven't seen anything further than sort of continuing to level out the property of that one lot in question. And of course, they're chipping away as if those foundations are going to eventually be there, which I think they have the right to do that. They just don't have the right to build them. So I don't know if you saw foundations all the way to the end of the of the excavation as of late. And they did reduce the number of those from 5 to 4. So for lack of a better way to say it, when that became from the board before, there was really just one person who spoke really just for him. And there was a couple of, I'm not for it or not against it type of comments made, but that all came down to presentation. We really didn't have what we needed to make an informed decision that night. And after a lot of review, and a lot of the aldermen have done more work on it, that they still need an opportunity to represent that. And that's what I believe we're going to do on the 9th. But we had no topographical things. We had no visuals. I even asked the question, go back and check the record, that are these going to be built up on the curb, along with all the single family homes that are still there? And it was sort of really didn't get answered. But when you go and look how it's actually going to end up, it's really got nothing to do with that roadway right in front of this particular house here. So all of this is going to be addressed. I believe there was some criteria that the developer had to meet in order to get it back on the agenda, where we can at least give it another fair chance for them to present their case in a better fashion.
I appreciate that, Jeff. Because I'll say, even from our perspective as a commission, we voted it through as well, So, yeah, I think it's tough when you have a lot of citizens from a neighborhood kind of come. But even with speaking to Joel, he kind of said some of the same things you're saying, that some of them have maybe even had a change of heart from how they felt that night. So
it was, well, I'm not going to say an anomaly, but yeah, I believe it was unanimous. But again, we really had nothing to work on. And then, discussing it after the fact, I said, well, there was nothing there that I could approve based on what the stories were told. And it was pretty one-sided. Like you said, very passionate plea. But I do think that particular person has come around to being in favor of that project. Maybe Joel can confirm that for us.
Okay.
Thank you, commissioners. Anyone else have comments? Okay, then Jake will call roll. We've had a motion and a second for withdrawing this item for this evening.
Call movers.
Pinkley and Davis.
Pinkley and Davis. So open vote.
Yes.
Chairperson Harris.
Yes.
Commissioner Richards.
Yes.
Alderman C.
Yes.
Commissioner Howden.
Yes.
Commissioner Pinkley.
Yes.
Commissioner Lloyd.
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Davis.
Yes.
Motion is carried to.
Thank you very much, Jake. Okay, Joel, I think we have another item to look at under the public hearing for this evening.
Yes, we do. So our next item this evening is a request for a special use permit to operate a shelter care facility within the property located at 215 Veterans Boulevard in Branson, Missouri. Just have a couple of people I'm letting in at this time for the item. The applicant and owner is Tracy Banks of Riley's Treasures, Generation Next as well. Current zoning that you can see of this property on Veterans Boulevard is neighborhood commercial. And again, as I mentioned in the title of the request, it's to operate a shelter care facility for the homeless. Next, I'll go through our vicinity maps, starting out with our aerial, showing the subject property outlined in red on the west side of Veterans Boulevard, south of Rourke Creek. Next, showing the zoning, neighborhood commercial, surrounded by other properties that are neighborhood commercial to the north, west, and south. And then the darker red that you see to the east and to the south is downtown zoning. Next is an existing land use graphic showing the property is currently commercial. It is adjacent to other properties that are office use. There's also some residential use to the north and to the west that you can see there, the yellow colors. And then our orthometric aerial views, so we can see from all four directions if necessary when we're talking about this item further. And now to go through some of the details of the request. So due to the pandemic this year, the Salvation Army has been unable to open their warming center. As a result, the applicant saw a need in the community and a desire to therefore provide temporary shelter to those needing a warm place to stay overnight. That meets the definition of shelter care facility in our zoning code. They're also collaborating with CAM, OCAC, and Elevate Branson to provide additional services to those staying within their facilities and longer care. Again, we've talked about the location on Veterans Boulevard. It's a 9,000 square foot building that was first built in 1940. It's been added on to multiple times that we've provided in the staff report, but we just want to highlight tonight the upper floor. That's where this use is being requested. And there's just under 3,000 square feet on the upper floor, and they're going to be sure that the lower floor is made inaccessible for anybody staying on the upper floor during the evening. The upper floor is separated into men's and women's sleeping areas, separate sleeping areas, and they do have a unisex restroom. There's also laundry facilities, storage rooms, a kitchen area, and a security and IT room. However, those spaces will not be available to those staying within the property. They're looking to operate between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 a.m., but only when temperatures are at or below 32 degrees. The maximum occupancy of the space on the upper floor is 25, and that includes 2 volunteer employees. So the max that they'd be allowed to have stay overnight would be 23 plus the 2 employees for a total of 25. They do look to have some rules while they're operating, which include no loitering, no littering, no begging for money or food or cigarettes or other things from those passing by. If someone is caught doing any of these things, they will be given a warning, and if they do it multiple times, then they will be banned from the facility. This request was made back in December. Unfortunately, with the holidays and our meeting schedule, it was not until this meeting where they had the opportunity to make their request to you all. However, there was an opportunity that was identified through the International Building Code by way of providing a temporary occupancy permit to help bridge the gap between December and today so that they could, again, provide the need to the community that they're wanting to. And since that time, there's roughly been about 60 nights that have been below 32 degrees. So obviously there was a need there, and so they were able to accomplish that gap bridge, again, with that temporary occupancy permit. We met with them and had a walkthrough, and they had a design professional brought on board and then brought on additional contractors to help them make the following improvements to the property. They've installed a new fire alarm system, which includes pull stations, smoke detectors, and horn strobes. They've provided new exit identification devices. They've finished the spaces throughout properly. I know that they needed some ceiling work done and some other finishes, and those have all been taken care of. They've upgraded the HVAC system, or are working on upgrading the HVAC system so it can circulate outside air better through the facility. And then making sure that there's a clear, unobstructed path for ingress and egress. And again, a lot of this has been accomplished, but I believe there are still some things that they're working through. We just wanted to provide a plan and also to show they've hired a design professional, Tom Treat, to assist them with this effort to make sure that they're meeting the occupancy requirements and the spatial requirements for this use. And that, again, came through the city with a building permit request. As a result of this information, staff does recommend approval based on the following conditions. Number 1, all construction activities covered by the special use permit shall conform to all codes and ordinances of the city. And number 2, the shelter care facility shall only operate within the upper floor of the existing structure with a maximum occupancy of 25, including 2 employees at all times during operation. And number 3, all beds shall be kept a minimum distance of 6 feet apart. And number 4, all occupants of the shelter care facility shall register upon initial entry, and they shall receive an identification card if they do not already have one in some form. And number 5, hours of operation shall be between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. and only when the outside temperature is at 32 degrees Fahrenheit or below. The hours of operation shall be posted on the entrance door as well as identification of the shelter being open or closed. And number 6, the shelter care facility shall operate and be inspected under the requirements listed in Branson Municipal Code Section 46-85 and shall not operate as a nightly rental. And number 7, animals shall not be allowed inside the facility. And finally, number 8, if all conditions of this resolution authorizing the issuance of this special use permit are not acted upon or on or before February 2nd, 2022, this special use permit shall be null and void. And before I send it back over to Chairman Harris, I do also want to make note that we had Ms. Sandy Hall provide a public comment on this request. I believe she's with us this evening as well, if there's any questions for her. But her comments are as follows. We own the property at Veterans Boulevard and Atlantic, directly across from Riley's Treasures. We have had problems with the homeless in the area. The problems have been 1, loitering on our property during business hours and at night. 2, leaving leftover food items, beer containers, and bottles full of urine. Number 3, asking our customers and tenants for cash and cigarettes. We have installed extra lights, placed no dumping and no trespassing signs, contacted Harold at the police department for extra patrols, and we have spoken to Tina, who is in charge of the warming center. She has been understanding. We are not against warming centers. However, our customers and tenants have a concern. With that, again, staff recommends approval. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Joel. Any of the commissioners have a question for Joel at this particular point?
Chairperson Harris?
Yes, Commissioner Howden.
Yeah, I just have a couple comments to make. You know, I have a little bit of experience with this. I volunteered with them the other night. And it was a quite rewarding experience. It's a long time. You're there from about 5:30 to 11 when they close. You know, I'm a manager of a hotel on Shepherd of the Hills Expressway. And I deal with some pretty kind of rough individuals that come and they try to check in. There are people that obviously jump from hotel to hotel in this town, you know, and so when you lower your rates, it gets a little dicey, you know. What I can say in response to the citizens' concern is that boy, this sure ran smoothly when I was there that night. Every one of the people that came, obviously there are individuals who, you know, are down on their luck in life, but they all know, especially because it's been going for a number of months now, they know the rules. They know the procedures. They were very kind. It was quite frankly a family atmosphere. One guy did have a dog. He couldn't stay there, so we gave him some dog food and he had to go on. But I guess the only thing I would say to that individual that had the concerned citizen is I was talking with some of the guys and they said, well, there was about 15 homeless people in this area. And by this area, they meant downtown. So they're already there. You know, having a warming center, I don't feel that it's a draw to any, you know, a magnet to that area. If there's already 15 and there's a maximum occupancy of 25 in this warming center, I don't necessarily see it drawing anything. Nobody was going in and out. That's not allowed. There was designated times for smoke breaks. Yeah, so I don't know that, you know, the warming center would sort of attribute to any loitering, at least from what I've seen. Now, maybe they've become more smooth, but I think that's something in the favor of the warming center because it has become more smooth as they've gone on, and the people that they do offer the services to realize that this is something that people are volunteering out of the kindness of their heart, so don't kind of abuse it. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Commissioner Howden. Any other commissioners have a question or comment at this particular point? Yes, Alderman C.
Sort of piggybacking on what Marshall said, I had a call from a business owner across from Liberty Plaza over the weekend. Same sort of complaint, not really complaining, but notification that they were, you know, pandering to some of those businesses there on both levels, some of their customers. And, you know, I don't know in what capacity they were in Liberty Plaza, whether they were on benches or in the bathrooms, but I'm not sure. But, you know, she did bring that to our attention. So you're right. they are down there, fortunately it's not that prevalent. And we'd like to think that some of them would take advantage of this shelter down in that area, or everybody in every area in town to do that. So I agree with that. They're here, and things like this should be able to help us down the road, at least when it's cold. So I probably was Tracy Banks' first frantic phone call when she started this whole process. I think she had a lot of bad intel, talked to a lot of the wrong people, and this thing started getting some press. And it was, my hat's off to the city to reel all this back in, and because it's a worthy cause, and it got out before it should have, and a lot of the ducks weren't in a row. But everybody down at the city and the banks have responded in such a way that we're here at this point now. So I do have one question though, Joel, with February 2nd, 2022, null and void on that special use permit. Is that for them to complete all the things in your list before this last page?
No, as it's pointed out in that middle line, it's all about initiate an action. So they've already initiated action. A lot of the conditions, it's just an ongoing thing. So, as long as they continue to operate and do so, then they have nothing to worry about because they've essentially already met that deadline.
Gotcha. Okay. So they are operating under a special use permit as we speak?
No, they're operating under a temporary occupancy permit through the building code. This would basically allow that occupancy permit to end, be finished out, and then they would be operating under a special use permit going forward.
Right. So, and just for the record, and I know the answer to this, but there was no concessions made for them that wouldn't have been made for somebody else in this situation, right? Everything above the board and by the book.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't instantaneous for the creativity to come to utilize the ICC. That came through some great research by our building staff, Royce Worms and Denny Rogers. They piled through the International Building Code and were able to find an opportunity to bridge that gap up to 180 days. And so it worked out. And thankfully, the applicant was very patient and understanding and willing to get the applications turned in and payments made and all the great stuff that people have to do when they make requests to the city. And so it came together, not probably as quickly as everybody would have hoped, but we were able to get there, and glad we're finally at a point to be discussing this with you all tonight.
I'll tell you, I'm amazed at the progress that has been made. And I know Tracy and the banks are she's a go-getter. You tell her to get something done, she's going to get it done, or she's going to find a way. But, kudos to the city and everybody involved. There's a lot of people to thank about this, because it was nice to see such a group effort from the private sector all the way down to the city to get this going to this point. So I'm real happy with the time frame.
Good. Thank you. Any of the other commissioners have a comment or question?
Chairman Harris?
Yes, Commissioner Pinkley.
Joel, this may not be the right time to ask, but I'm curious what the status of the building permits are at this time.
So they were able to make quick work of the electrical work and the fire alarm systems to get to a point where our inspectors were satisfied that people could occupy the space. I believe that they were still working on a couple of things. I don't know the exact details of what those are, but they were very minor in nature. Again, we asked our inspectors up front that they had to be comfortable with people staying in that upper floor for us to be willing to let them do so. And we got there very quickly. This just takes care of making it, be final and approved.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pinkley. Anyone else? Would the
Chairperson Harris?
Yes, Vice Chair Davis.
If we have Miss Sandy Hall on the meeting tonight, are you going to offer a time for her to speak?
I am.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is the applicant here? I know Tracy Banks, I have not met her, but I think I see her. Would you like to make a comment? And then we'll get some comments from the public.
Sure. I just want to say thank you, obviously, to everyone. Joel, I probably owe you a big fat apology. So I apologize for that. And we really do appreciate the city and what you guys have done. And with Sandy, I'll let her speak too, but on the side of our business that faces Sandy's business, we have installed a camera system so that we can see if any of our people are going over there. Since she's filed the complaints, we went ahead and installed a camera over there to see what was going on that side of the building.
Okay. Thank you. Any of the commissioners have any questions directly for Ms. Banks? No? Is Mrs. Hall there? Would you like to make a comment or ask a question?
Can you hear me?
We can now.
All right, thank you. And thank you for allowing me to the meeting. I have met Tina. I have not met Tracy. Tina has been very concerned, and we have not had problems lately at the property. I do have a couple of questions. One is, does this change? It operates like a bed and breakfast. So does it change the zoning in the area, or does the zoning have to be changed? And number two, will there be a petition to operate in the spring, summer, fall, when temperatures are not at 32? Will this be an ongoing facility?
Okay, well, maybe let Ms. Banks answer the second one dealing with your uses. Do you anticipate this going on through the rest of the year?
We do not.
Only with the degree 32
Cold
degrees or
temperature.
below, right? Which is what the special use permit is. And of course, if you don't follow the conditions of the special use permit, the city will take that away.
Yes.
So 32 or on or under. Then we'll let Joel mention or talk to about the zoning change. Joel, is there something required in zoning change for the special use permit to be active?
No, so a shelter care facility is designated as a special use in our use table in Chapter 94. So since it's already zoned neighborhood commercial, they can work with that. And that's why they're before you all this evening for permission to have that use as a shelter care facility. And what their operation is, how they're operating, as I stated at the beginning of our presentation, does meet the definition of a shelter care facility. It does not meet the definition of a bed and breakfast type use.
Okay.
I have another question.
Certainly.
I would suggest that the city have something on record that if the number would grow and the center begins to see higher demand, the solution not be a burden to the property, and we would put a limit on the number of people seeking the shelter in the downtown.
You're referring to the whole downtown area, not just this one facility.
Yes.
Yes, okay, right, because the special use permit for this one is a maximum of 25 people, which I guess really is only 23 individuals, I believe, because you have 2 people staying there.
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay, okay. Any of the commissioners have a question or comment for Mrs. Hall or Ms. Banks?
I guess.
Yes, Commissioner Howden.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to the concern of that's been brought up in our community with, certain of the drug rehabilitation facilities, that they can somewhat act as a magnet to our community. I understand that concern. I think when we're dealing with something like this, they're very stringent on it's got to hit that 32. So, and I know it was they were telling some of the guys, hey, it wasn't going to hit this the next couple nights. So I don't foresee anyone sort of coming into our community, camping out just in case it hits 32 or anything like that. I don't really see it as kind of the same draw as a community or to the community that maybe the concern about some of the drug rehabilitation facilities in the past have been. So
right. May I speak?
Yes, please, Mrs. Hall.
I have been impressed with Tina. She and I have talked on the phone several times. We have a great deal in common with past employment for working with people of this nature. And we are not against warming centers. Please understand that. We just want to know that it can be controlled. We know that there can be times when it will backslide. We understand that. But I think it's a good idea to have it limited to the number and also just to the 32 degrees and below, and not consider using it for 95 degrees plus, etc., for the
Right.
rest of the year.
Right. Thank you. And I think the special use permit speaks to all of those items. So
I think so.
yes, thank you. Does anyone else have a question or a comment for Mrs. Hall or Ms. Banks?
Chairperson Harris.
Yes, Alderman C.
Joel, maybe you'd want to clarify for Sandy what she was saying about, obviously the maximum occupancy here is taken care of in the special use permit, but I believe she may have been addressing other facilities that may pop up downtown. Is there, I mean, you know, that would be something that we would have to create to have a limit on that?
It's just something that you all would take into consideration as requests in the future come in. A shelter care facility is only allowed in our neighborhood and community commercial districts. So you actually will never see a request within the downtown district. So given this area, this particular area, there is an opportunity with the surrounding neighborhood commercials that you could see an additional request. And again, you all at that time would just have to take into consideration, you know, existing conditions around it, and if you feel it's too much or not enough or what have you. But you would have that opportunity because, again, as a special use permit, you would review it just as you're doing tonight. And in the same breath, if the applicant this evening had ever a desire to increase their occupancy or expand the use, they would have to come back to you all and amend their special use permit and go through this process again.
Gotcha. And that's where I was going to go next with that. So it would come to us and we would consider proximity, occupancy, you know, what do we already have in that area? So I'm saying, or so you're sort of saying that they could go, well, I'll call it to the west, like back behind this facility and that neighborhood in behind it, or where else could this be downtown?
Right. So going back here to the zoning graphic in the presentation, all those parcels that are the salmon or pink color on the screen, those would be neighborhood commercial. You do see a little bit of community commercial once you cross Atlantic further to the west. Those it would be a prohibited, or I'm sorry, would be an allowed use within that district. So anytime one would come about in that district, it would not come before you all. It would simply just be allowed.
Be allowed, right? Okay.
So that would, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Sandy.
That's right, please.
That then would allow on Atlantic Street and also on the street running north and south, an additional facility without needing to go back to the alderman to approve. Is that correct?
No, they would still require a special use permit, so they would have to go through the planning commission.
As this is. Mhm. And that certainly would increase an attraction to the downtown area, which I think we'd have to be very careful that that's really what we want to do. And again, we are not against warming stations. I think clusters of them in a tight-knit area may not be the best idea.
Okay, thank you.
Chairperson Harris?
Yes, Commissioner Howden.
Yeah, first I want to say, you know, I really appreciate all your comments, Miss Sandy, and, you know, your concerns about this. I think that, you know, people in the community, they share a philanthropic heart, but they also, you know, share some of these concerns that kind of keep Branson a certain type of place and maintains our values on both sides. So I understand that. I think it's really important when we talk about the places that it can be, that we work through the hypotheticals to cover all our bases as a commission. But I also think that it's really important to look at the facility that this sits in right now, and the fact that downstairs is a thrift shop that already has sort of philanthropic means. And so it really actually is sort of, the perfect type of building for this, and so while we're kind of going through a hypothetical and saying, well, it could exist in this type of zoning, I think as a commission, it would have to meet a lot of the prerequisite aspects that the building already has for us as a commission to move forward with approving any other spot like
Yes.
this.
Thank you, because we are in a neighborhood commercial.
Right.
So we would need to be very careful and move more toward community commercial and away from being within 2 or 3 blocks, having several shelters might not be the best idea for the downtown area.
Sure. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Any other commissioners?
Harris, I had another question
Yes, Commissioner Pinkley.
for Joel. Joel, had COVID not been in existence, would this warming center be needed?
I think that's best asked by the applicant. I'm gonna punt to her.
Okay, all right.
Ms. Banks, you wish to respond?
I think absolutely it's needed with the amount of people that we're seeing each evening. I think absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Harris,
Yes. Vice Chair.
Commissioner Davis here.
Yes.
Joel and Alderman C, Ms. Hall brings up a good point, not, I think, a different point than the application before us here. One for the alderman and possibly some additional staff work from the Planning Commission to determine if it would be in the best interest in the cases of warming shelters or shelters similar to this, that would be similar but yet different, require special use permits. If there were a distance requirement put on those between different shelters, we do have that tool in our toolbox, and in this case it could be appropriate. So I would request that you spend a little time thinking about that, Joel, and or asking the alderman to create a recommendation on that.
We'd be glad to put something together and bring it before you in a meeting coming up very soon.
Thank you.
Chairperson Harris.
Yes, Alderman C.
So Commissioner Davis is right on track there. And if you think about it, it might be better to have them on the other end of town or something, as far as logistically, a lot of these people get around on foot. Not saying that we would go out of our way to try to make those happen, but if they did, and restrictions would be, especially in the downtown area, it's tight. But that would be a good way to do that, is try to put some limits, proximity limits, and even maybe just by certain districts or neighborhoods down there too. So that's a great idea, and it definitely be considered. So Tracy.
Ms. Banks.
Yes.
I think this, Salvation Army.
Yes,
They're not doing this anymore, correct?
correct.
So I think this would, piggyback onto the comment about whether COVID had struck or not, that since they were not doing it anymore, that all the reason for the need.
Sure.
That was it.
May I speak?
Yes, please. Ms. Hall.
I think that possibly Branson might take a look at what effect this attitude has had on Santa Monica, California, and not be surprised by the unintended consequence. Santa Monica is a tight. Streets are very close together, and the public is right there with all of the tourism. They have been surprised by unintentional consequences by putting too many of this type of facility in a small location. And our downtown is small. It is. So that's something that if you want to consider another one, look at the consequences of Santa Monica, California. And they ended up with some unintentional consequences due to that. And Tracy and Tina, again, we are not against warming stations, but we do remember what is it that Branson, downtown Branson, is all about, and to make sure that we do keep it in that sphere.
Thank you, Mrs. Hall. Anyone else have a question or comment at this time? Hearing none, then we have a resolution before us. It is Resolution SU 20-10, requesting a special use permit to operate a shelter care facility within the property located at 215 Veterans Boulevard, Branson, Missouri. The chair would entertain a motion for approval, and then we'll see about a vote.
So moved.
Move to adopt. Move to approve.
Okay, so I have Alderman C for the motion, and then who was this?
David.
Oh, was it? Okay. Alderman Dave or Commissioner Davis, and then who did we have for a second? Or did we have a second?
I'll second. Howden.
Howden, thank you. Any other comments or questions by the commissioners before we have Jake call roll for the vote? Hearing none. Jake, would you call open vote for us, please, after having Davis and Howden make the motions?
Chairperson Harris.
Yes.
Now open vote.
Yes.
Chairperson Harris,
Yes.
Commissioner Richards,
Yes.
Alderman C,
Yes.
Commissioner Howden,
Yes.
Commissioner Pinkley,
Yes.
Commissioner Lloyd,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Davis.
Yes.
Motion is carried.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, commissioners, and thank you, Ms. Hall, for your comments, and Ms. Banks for your appearance. We appreciate all your efforts, and good luck to you with this endeavor.
Yes,
Joel, I
thank
think
you so much.
You're welcome.
And Tina and Tracy, we will work closely together.
Thank you.
Ms. Hall, we do hear you. We hear your concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Chairman
Yes,
Harris, can I make one other comment before we move on? I don't even think we need to go that far to check out the issue. I think if you go to City of Springfield and downtown, they have some of the same problems, I think, with overcrowding.
yeah. I think Joel and Jake will probably do a good job, I'm
Yeah.
sure, finding some places around that we can get some information from.
Yeah.
It's always good to look around the country to places that are similar, particularly tourist areas, et cetera. So, good. Thank you, Commissioner Lloyd. Joel, are we ready to go for Telecommunications Tower, I believe?
Yes, we are. I'm gonna let our applicant in.
Thank you.
All right. As mentioned, our next item this evening is a request for a special use permit to construct a telecommunications tower and facility within the property located at 250 South Wildwood Drive, Branson, Missouri. Our applicant is Paul Replica, who we have this evening along with Vincent O'Flaherty, and the owner, Telecom Realty Consultants, LLC. The property is currently zoned community commercial, and as mentioned in the title, applicant's request is to construct a telecommunications tower within this property. Next, going through our vicinity maps, here's an aerial showing the subject property outlined in red. You'll see it's to the east of Wildwood Drive, and we're just south of Green Mountain Drive at this location. Current zoning showing this property as well as the majority of the surrounding properties zoned community commercial. We do have mixed use just to the east, and you can see a little bit of high density residential to the southwest, and that would be the Thousand Hills Golf Course area. Existing land use showing we do have some lodging in the area, but there's also quite a bit of vacant properties. Our orthometric views in case we need to refer back to them. And then getting into some of the details. The property itself is around 2 acres. It's undeveloped at this point, so it's wooded. They're looking to provide a 60-foot by 60-foot leased site within the center of the property. Within that leased site, there would be a 130-foot tall monopole telecommunications tower. Those have been the ones we've seen go up around town, most recent, the monopole. You will take note that the 130 feet is 30 feet above what code would allow for community commercial district and height. As a result, they also have made a request to our Board of Adjustment for a variance that will be heard by them later this month. One of the requirements for height in excess of 50 feet in the community commercial district is to provide additional setback of 1 additional foot for every 2 feet excess in height. So they've done that through 40 additional feet of setbacks on all 4 sides, front, rear, and both sides. The equipment area will provide space for up to 4 future carriers. And that area, again, that 60 foot by 60 foot space will be protected by a 6-foot chain link fence with barbed wire strands around the top. This leased site will be accessible from Wildwood Drive via a 14-foot wide access easement. So now to show this graphically, again, you can notice the unique shape of the property from our vicinity maps, which I'm outlining here now on the screen. This is Wildwood on the west side here, and it will be the road that will be providing access to the leased site, which you can see here again in the center of the property, and the pole itself, the monopole, being located right in the center of that. So right in the center of the property. I'll also point out this dashed line that the leased area is well within. That represents the setbacks, the additional setbacks, not just the minimum, but the additional setbacks they've provided. So clearly showing that it is well within those areas as well. Next, we have enlarged view of that 60-foot by 60-foot leased area, which is this square area, the monopole in the very center, and then there's the 4 lease areas around it. And then here to the right, we have an elevation of the tower showing that there will be an opportunity for 4 different carriers. We also have the elevations next to here as well, with the first one at 88, the second one at 100, the third one at 112, and the top one at 124 feet, with the top of the tower at the 130 as mentioned before. Because of our proximity to the downtown airport, we do make sure that the applicant does what they need to through the FAA, which includes some paperwork, which they've actually already provided to staff. So we already have that in hand. They also, because they're under 200 feet, do not need a light. So I know that's come up in previous discussions, so we want to make sure that that's clear that one is not required based on the height they've proposed. The location that we've identified on the screen in the red circle is the approximate location of the proposed tower. This is a graphic out of the Community Plan 2030, specifically Figure 4, and it helps with the visible hillsides within our community. And you'll notice there's some shading in this area, and best we can tell, it falls somewhere in between the somewhat visible to moderately visible, which essentially means there's anywhere from 1 to 9 observer points that can see this area from throughout the community. That's anywhere from about 0 to 2%. The proposed site, just to give you some reference, the base of the pole would be at an elevation of 896. And then, as I said, for reference, to the north where 76 Country Boulevard intersects with Wildwood Drive, that's at an elevation of 1,020. And then going down the other way on Wildwood where it intersects with Fall Creek Road, that's an elevation of 820. So again, just to give you a little bit of perspective there. As a result, staff does recommend approval based on the following conditions. Number 1, the design, installation, and operation of the telecommunications tower and facilities shall be in accordance with all applicable city, state, and federal requirements. And number 2, the telecommunications tower and facilities shall generally conform with the submitted site plan, Exhibit A, and shall conform to all codes and ordinances of the city. And number 3, the facilities shall be appropriately screened with landscaping as required in Branson Municipal Code, Chapter 94. And number 4, documentation showing the issuance of the Federal Communication Commission's antenna structure registration shall be provided to the Planning and Development Department prior to erection of the tower. And number 5, if conditions 1 through 4 of this resolution authorizing the issuance of this special use permit are not acted upon or before February 2nd, 2022, this special use permit shall be null and void. As I mentioned, we do have a couple of our applicants with us this evening, and I do know we had a member of the public request to speak as well. So we have Gail Meyer with us, just to let you know, Chairperson Harris.
Thank you, Joel. Okay, does any of the commissioners have a question of Joel at this particular point? No? Is the applicant, Mr. Blanca, there? Joel, do we have him?
Yeah, Paul or Vincent, are you able to unmute?
Yes, we're here.
Oh, okay. Chairman Harris here. I have a question for you. One, how many different carriers do you have lined up already for the poll?
Chairperson Harris, this is Vincent O'Flaherty, attorney for the applicant.
Okay.
And Paul Rabica, president of MW Towers, who is the applicant on this, is here with me.
Okay.
And in response to your question at this point in time, the answer is 1.
Okay. And then my second question would be, when do you anticipate starting construction on the pole?
Presuming we received the variance on February 25th, we would probably say within the next 3 to 4 months. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any of the other commissioners have a question for Mr. Flaherty or Mr. Blanca?
I do, Chairperson.
Yes, Alderman C.
I may be half joking, but is it going to look like a tree? I mean, I've seen them before that they're sort of semi-disguised as look like a tree.
Right.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Alderman. They call that camouflaging the tower,
right.
And this was not going to be a camouflage tower.
A guy could wish or hope.
That's right. Any of the other commissioners have a question?
Commissioner Davis?
Yes, Vice Chair Davis.
Yes, if this tower were to only be a home to one carrier, what would the height be?
It'd be the same height, the 130 feet that's been applied for. But certainly our anticipation is that once it's there, that we will have more than one tenant.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions by any of the commissioners?
I have a question.
Yes.
Chairman.
Yes.
This is more for Joel. Joel or the applicant. What do we have a requirement if the tower becomes unusable or abandoned that it has to be taken down?
Yes, Chair Commissioner Lloyd. I forgot to read off number 6. We usually have that number 5 as our final one, but you just triggered my head that we had a number 6 condition. So I will read that very quickly. You're exactly right. The final condition, number 6, if use of the telecommunications tower ceases, the applicant shall remove the tower within 180 days. Failure to remove the abandoned tower shall be grounds for the city to cause removal at the expense of the property owner. I apologize for not including that in our staff report, but it was part of the packet that was posted for the meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairperson, this is Vince O'Flaherty.
Yes.
I also wanted to say that all 6 conditions are acceptable to the applicant.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. O'Flaherty. Anyone else? Any of the other commissioners have a question at this time? And I believe Joel indicated we have one of our citizens that's in on this, Gail Meyer. Mr. Meyer, are you here and have a question?
I am. Thank you, Chairperson Harris. I do have, well, I guess I have a couple comments. And I will tell you, it's been a long, long time since I did any tower work in engineering. But a couple things that give me pause about this is, as you may be aware, I am the chairman of the West Highway 76 CID at this point. And when we did the community survey, the number one thing that the community wanted was for us to remove power lines and basically the visual ugly. And it seems contradictory for us to add towers in close proximity unless we've done something to make sure they aren't ugly. So Alderman C was on the right track. I'm not sure if it's applicable to this particular tower. I did look at the topo map. It appears that they want to go to 130 feet because it is down off elevation-wise off of Wildwood. It would still be 90 feet higher than Wildwood at that intersection. And the top 50 foot is designed as antennas. So, you know, I think we all need to pause and think about the beauty of the Ozark Mountains and the visual ugly and how we would address it either now or later. So I have two things that I would ask you to consider. And one of those is the community does not like visual ugly. They've told us that on the 76 corridor. And when we waiver to 130 feet, and it is 90 feet above the grade of Wildwood, that is about 10 stories, something similar to the Radisson. And part of that waiver would indicate to me that they have to have that height, which might also indicate to me that it's not in exactly the place that they would like to have it. I appreciate the input very much. I will tell you this is a little weird, sitting at home giving input this way, but I appreciate you guys making it available in this way. And I also appreciate all of the work that you all do on behalf of this community. And thank you very much. Those are my comments. I will trust your judgment.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Appreciate having your input and having you here. Any of the commissioners have a question or comment related to perhaps what Mr. Meyer just talked about? Any comments? Yes.
So let's go there. What is the cost on camouflaging a tower like this? I believe that would be for
Mr.
clarity there.
Yeah, this is Vince O'Flaherty. I'd need to visit with my client about that. I don't have that specific number, but it'd be significantly higher than what this is.
So working off of what Gail said, you know, is this something that we approach now or, you know, in the future? I know we did one of these recently over there by the Welk, but really was in an area close to a building and, you know, not like right downtown here where we're at. So that might be something that we want to consider about making that a requirement. Or I know there's probably only one way you can camouflage it, and it would be the tree look. I don't know of any other way that you could do that, but I think it's something we do need to look into though.
Thank you. Any other commissioner have a question or comment?
This is Commissioner Lloyd, and I have brought up more than once about these towers that we need to be protective of our visual parity in our community, and I think we do need to be either watchful. I've seen communities where these hidden towers are where they're trying to disguise them as trees, and I think it's something we might want to consider in the future. And I think we also need to be aware of not letting too many towers. This is a commercial thing, so we don't want to have a tower on every little corner around here one of these days. So be cautious of that too.
All right. I guess two of my comments would be, one, I know Joel, you might review with us, the state legislature passed some state laws not too long ago, somewhat limiting the ability of local government to regulate these. And then two, I know we have had applicants before that showed us some pictures of some towers that were made to look like trees, but obviously if you had a 130-foot tree, that would be like having a sequoia in the middle of our red cedars, and probably wouldn't, really hide it that much. It might make it go along with some of our other themes we have. I'm not sure, but Joel, you might speak to the laws that were
Yeah.
put out.
Sure. Yeah. A couple of thoughts to share with the group. The first would be that we obviously hear what Gail said about the 76 corridor, and that's why telecommunication towers are not allowed in the entertainment district. And even though that's the highest ridge in the community, and that's where all the cell tower providers want to be to get the best signal, we do not allow towers on that corridor for that very reason, because we do cherish the Ozark beauty and the visibility of our community. So that being said, they're still trying to get as close as possible to that corridor because that's where the people are, that there's a need to take pressure off of their towers. And I think that's one of the main reasons we're seeing this request in this area, so it can fill that need along the 76 corridor. One thing we've done over the years is we've taken these requests and positively looked at the heights going beyond the 100 feet is for the single purpose of trying to limit the amount of towers. By allowing a provider to go 30 feet taller, that more than likely saves us from having at least one, if not more, towers in the community, because they have to fill those gaps. They have to fill their coverage. And if they're able to do it better with one tower than multiple towers because they're being limited to height, we see that as a positive from staff's perspective. To the camouflaging topic, we would simply echo what Chairman Harris was saying, that, if it was a forested area and the tower was similar height to that forest, it would make more sense to camouflage it in a similar capacity or similar look. Given this will rise well above the small cedars that are on the property, we really do believe it would stand out more than it would camouflage by them attempting to do anything to try and mask it. And, I would simply say that I think as you stand on 76 and you do a 360 around the view shed, you're going to see a lot more than cell towers. And so to wrap up our comments, we would simply point to what the state has done the last several years, which is really stripped down our abilities to have, some of the regulations we had just 5 years ago or so, that we can't put an undue burden on those providing cell signals and towers. And so, just something to be mindful of. And since we have allowed towers throughout the community, and this would be the first one requiring them to do something a little bit more, definitely something to take under consideration, and how that consistently would be looked against the other requests.
Right. Thank you, Joel. And I know the city obviously probably leases space on our water towers and stuff. Are all of those at maximum, do you know?
Yes, I mean they're packed. There's quite a few antennas on the top of all those towers, and they do obviously provide that opportunity for cell carriers to be on 76 without the need for a tower. So they have filled an incredible need, but there still is a need to fill in the gaps.
Okay, thank you. Any of the other commissioners have any questions or comment?
I just have one last one, Chair.
Yeah.
Mr. Flaherty, and this may be a question for your client, but I've done my homework on the 5G stuff as much as I can, and I might not even know anything about it, but this tower would even be able to facilitate 5G?
I'm just looking at my client and he's shaking his head up and down. The answer would be yes.
Yes.
And if I could just follow up on what was said earlier, this site was chosen out of a respect for the area, and we appreciate the comments about the beauty and the area itself, but we purposefully chose this site in hopes of addressing and filling the need for the tower, at the same time respecting the area. And just for the record, the statute that the chairperson was referencing is Missouri Statute 67.5094, which does prohibit entities such as yourself from dictating what type of materials we can use on our towers. Having said that, though, we're respectful for the community, and we're trying to do that with this application.
Yes, and going with that, in my research that I've done was based on the city of Houston, and basically, I'm not saying they greased the skids, but they made it really easy for contractors to not have to pull permits, wait for permits, and basically then neighbors' yards, in the right of way would call what they were calling the mini fridges, and every 2,000 feet, and it was almost like nobody had any say in it at all. So I was just wondering if you guys are encountering that. I know this is sitting out in the middle of a field, but I think there's federal stuff also that just allows this, it's in the name of progress, basically.
Yes, I don't have anything further to add on that. This will be state-of-the-art site that will look nice.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any other commissioner have a question or comment?
This is Commissioner Pinkley.
Yes, Commissioner Pinkley.
I'd like to ask if Chris Lebec might have a comment on 5G and its coordination with this particular tower and the feasibility of that.
Is Attorney Lebec there?
I am. Can you all hear me just fine?
We can. We can.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. That's an excellent question by Commissioner Pinkley with regards to, and that's what he's referencing is the Small Wireless Facilities Deployment Act. If this board recalls, back in 2019, we were basically mandated by the Missouri State Legislature to pass some regulations with regards to the deployment of what we call small cells. So within our city code, we have in chapter, let's see here, chapter 78, article concerning small wireless facilities. So the idea right now is, and the way that technology works is those small boxes, if you will, they piggyback off of these larger towers. So there are some design requirements that we're allowed to do, some volume requirements that we're allowed to do, but just like with wireless facility deployment, we are very limited in what we can do, and that's all spelled out in city code. So if there is an opportunity here for 5G deployment along the 76 corridor, it's going to be subject to a different set of restrictions that we have laid out in chapter 78 of our city code that piggybacks off of state law. So again, there's some design things we can do to make sure that those facilities, which will ultimately be deployed in our right of way, that those are beautified, if you will. So hopefully that answers your question, Commissioner Pinkley.
Thank you, Attorney Lebec. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question of staff or Mr. O'Flaherty?
So Chairperson Harris?
Yes, Commissioner Howden.
Joel, if you could just clear up for me, because I think I'm a little bit confused on what our ability to do is here. Are you saying that we really don't have the ability to vote this down, or could you just clarify that for me, please?
Well, so it's obviously up to you all how you vote. We just provide the information like any other item, and you all then make a determination if you feel it should be approved or not. With this particular request, it requires a special use permit. So cities do absolutely have the power to regulate location of these towers, which is why we don't allow them in the entertainment district, but we do allow them in other districts, including the community commercial district. However, with a special use permit, so that it can come before you all, so that there can be a public discussion in the community if any concerns are raised by adjacent property owners or by others in the community. This is the opportunity for that to occur, which is why the special use permit process is so great for this particular use to have. But again, as staff has reviewed this particular request on this particular property, we definitely support it and recommend approval with the 6 conditions we've presented to you all this evening.
Thank you, Joel.
Chairperson Harris, this is Pinkley. I have one more and I'll stop.
Certainly.
First, I'd like to thank Mr. Meyer. I appreciate his comments and I completely agree with him and I support that. And that is what the driving force for the 76 corridor has been from beginning.
That's right.
And so that's the will of the people, and that's what the city's trying to do. With that said, my question is to Mr. O'Flaherty. What we're voting on is the tower at 100 feet. There's a separate variance request being requested that's going to be voted on by a different group. My question is, if that is not approved, will the tower still go in at 100 feet? And if it were, would it still serve the 5G corridor on 76?
Thank you. Mr. O'Flaherty?
Well, of course, as designed right now, a 100-foot tower would not support these 4 antennas. So we would have to go back to the engineers and view it further. I can't make a formal decision on that at this point. But as proposed now, 100-foot would not be tall enough for this project.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else have a comment or question?
Chairperson Harris, is it
Yeah.
appropriate for me to comment again?
Yes, please, Mr. Meyer.
So I've heard all that, and I think what I would suggest in the future is maybe you all in planning and zoning have a discussion. Quite frankly, the city has spent a tremendous amount of money making water towers look better. And the city is going to spend millions of dollars on 76, making it look better. At some point in time, I believe that you all do need to have the discussion, find out what you can do, and try to determine how you make things like this look better. We should understand that we do have that ability. And I also will tell you, I know that we have to have towers. I know that we have to have telecom. Those antennas can be put on top of the Radisson. They can be put on top of the Grand Palace. And I would point you towards the Best Western Kirkwood Inn, which is at the intersection of Lindbergh and the interstate to St. Louis, has several towers on top of that building. So it's possible that we might be able to use some buildings on the 76 corridor and get rid of some towers. I think that's a future discussion. And again, I appreciate you allowing me to comment. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer.
Director
Joel?
Hornicle and Chairperson Harris, can I chime in just to clarify some law on this?
Sure.
I think the attorney for the applicant, Mr. O'Flaherty, referenced this in section 67.5094, which deals with wireless facilities. This is what says what lays out what we as a authority or a city can and cannot do. And the relevant piece that we must be really cognizant of when we review this special use permit is subsection 16, which basically prohibits us from, and I quote, imposing any requirements or obligations regarding the presentation or appearance of facilities, including but not limited to those relating to the kind or types of materials used and those relating to arranging, screening, or landscaping of facilities if such regulations or obligations are unreasonable. You heard Director Hornicle talk about an undue burden. We have these concerns about potentially affecting the 76 corridor. I would just state, just so that the commission is clear, that we got to be really careful here in our examination of this application for this permit in light of some of the restrictions that the state of Missouri has put on us by state law, so that we are uniform in the application of our rules relating to the application of rules by other municipalities. So just want to point that out, that we got to kind of really be careful here tonight.
Thank you.
Chairperson Harris, question.
Vice Chair Davis.
Attorney LeBeck, clarify a little bit for us on the approval of this application. Commissioner Pinkley alluded to this earlier. We do not have the authority to approve a 130-foot structure. Tell me how that process will have to play out, because tonight we're not approving 130 feet.
No, yeah, that's an excellent point, Vice Chair. What I'm merely referencing is the comments that have alluded tonight to trying to address this tower up, if you will, be it make it a gigantic Christmas tree or any type of ways to mask it. We got to be careful that any of those type of restrictions under state law are reasonable. That's the only point that I'm making.
So review with me the process that now must take place for this to become a 130-foot tower.
Joel, do you want to field that one?
Yeah. So again, the applicant has made a request to our Board of Adjustment for a variance, a height variance, to allow them to go to a height of 130 feet. So a variance of exceeding the 100-foot cap that's allowed under the community commercial. So that's set to go before our Board of Adjustment later this month on February 25th, and that board will then make that determination as to allow the variance or not.
Are you good with that, Vice Chair Davis?
Yeah, thank you for the explanation.
Okay. And Joel, how many of our towers are over, current towers are over the 100-foot maximum?
I can't say with certainty, but I do know the Board of Adjustment within the past decade has approved 2 variances for height.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you all. Anyone else have any questions or comments at this time? Appreciate everyone's input. Yes.
Yeah. So, after listening to the advice of our attorney when it comes to the sort of the aesthetics of the actual tower itself,
right.
I think it's really important that we look back at that 2030 plan, and we look back at those visibility aspects of it that are very community minded, and that our community did put forward. I think it's easy to sort of follow those guidelines, but then make exception after exception. I'm not saying that's what we're doing here, but I think at the end of the day, we need to fall back on those because we can't, tweak the aesthetics of it. So at least that's my perspective as one commissioner. So
sure. Thank you.
Chairperson Harris?
Yes, Vice Chair Davis.
Joel, I have a comment for you as we, and as you well know, I'm a great proponent of the community plan, and I'm delighted that we have been able to maintain a concern for the view shed within our community plan. I'm getting sort of an opinion or concern or worry from Mr. Meyer that may not be robust enough to preserve the integrity of the visual experience along our most important stretch of the road in our entertainment district. It's all well and good that we've limited these from the high ridge, as you call it, of Highway 76 and the entertainment district, but that may not be good enough to preserve what we are selling here. And that is a sense of place that we're going to ruin if we're not careful. So I would like for you, Joel, to add that to your additional short list of things to do, is to maybe circle back around and revisit the sensitive areas of our community in terms of tourism and how that's shifting and continues to shift. We've seen that in the last 5 years. The nodal points that are developing are somewhat different than maybe what we anticipated, and it may be time to revisit those view sheds to try to make sure that our experience remains positive. Has little or nothing to do with this application, but it has a lot to do with going forward.
Thank you.
Would you do that, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to. We're very excited, and hopefully we'll be able to take under the update of the Community Plan 2030 later this year. We're really looking forward to kicking that off and updating that plan, including all the graphics that are included therein. Again, not to beat a dead horse, but this particular site was found to be somewhat to moderately visible. If it was within an area that fell under the highly to extremely visible, we would, as a staff, definitely have more concern with that location. I've worked closely with Paul on multiple requests that he's made to the city over the years, and I believe Paul is well aware of this graphic, and he spends quite a bit of time looking for properties throughout the community. And we have a dialogue between the two of us about, before it even reaches you all, about certain properties and having, marks in the plus column and marks in the negative column. And he definitely has walked away from a couple sites after we've talked and used this graphic for reference to explain the community's desire about view sheds. The view sheds are important. A monopole is far better of a structure than some of the other cell phone tower structures that could be built that are out there in the world. So we are definitely proponents of the monopole for sure. And what we're truly trying to prevent from ruining our view sheds is tall buildings that completely block those views. Monopole structures, amusement structures that are 50% transparent or more, those are the things that are allowed to get above that 50-foot cap with additional setbacks to ensure that we're not ruining the distant views. Again, as I mentioned earlier, when you look across our Ozark Hills, you will see numerous utilities, whether they're electric poles or monopoles or water towers. And obviously we don't want to go crazy and more is more, but at the same time, a monopole is far different than a 130-foot hotel tower, which would be a completely different discussion on this property than a 130-foot monopole.
Thank you, Joel. Well said.
Thank you, Joel. Anyone else? Hearing none, then we're looking at resolution SU 20-12, which is a request for special use permit to construct a telecommunications tower and facility within the property located at 250 South Wildwood Drive here in Branson, Missouri. So the chair would entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
And Clave for that. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Richards.
Yes.
Thank you. And any other comments by the commissioners before we have Jake take a roll vote for us? No? Okay, Jake, looks like we have Pinkley and Richards on the motions, and if you would call open roll for us, that'd be great.
Now open vote.
Yes.
Chairperson Harris,
Yes.
Commissioner Richards,
Yes.
Alderman C,
Yes.
Commissioner Howden,
No.
Commissioner Pinkley,
Yes.
Commissioner Lloyd,
No.
Vice Chairperson Davis.
Yes.
Close vote. Motion is carried.
Okay, so it looks like it's 5-2. Thank you. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, representatives, Paul and Vincent. Appreciate your time, and Mr. Meyer, appreciate your input with the decisions. Joel, I think we have a little more to go to this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, if you give me a second, I'm just gonna.
Sure.
Okay, I think we're set here. Apologize. So our last item this evening is a request for a municipal code amendments to Chapter 94 zoning pertaining to nightly rentals. Nightly rentals appears in Chapter 94 in Article 4. Prior to 2016, we actually kind of mentioned this a little earlier. Nightly rentals were handled very, very simply in the Branson Municipal Code, Chapter 22. That's the business chapter for business licenses. And it quite simply stated for a very long time that lodging establishments, it didn't even refer to nightly rentals, but that lodging establishments shall not be allowed in what at that time was the R1 zoning district, which became the low density residential district. So that was all that was stated in code about nightly rentals. However, as we all know, nightly rentals have grown in popularity. So when we did our work in the Unified Development Code in Chapter 94, we added a nightly rental use category to the use table to be very clear and make that separation between a lodging establishment and a nightly rental. Additionally, our attorney did some work in Chapter 22 to clean things up in a similar regard, just to provide additional clarity once again in 2018. We've been working closely with Alderman Simmons and Skanes on this particular topic of late. We did receive several complaints from neighbors and residents within the Hideaway Hills subdivision Around June of last year, they were having problems with two particular nightly rentals on their street. One that did have a business license and was approved to operate, and one that was operating without a license. Through those discussions with a couple of the neighborhood representatives, we met again in November of 2020 to identify some potential solutions to their concerns. However, in going through that lengthy list that we all agreed to, we identified there was a stronger opportunity with the attorney working more in Chapter 22, particularly about agents being responsible parties. Sometimes property owners that live in other states are hard to come by, so we need to increase our opportunities to hold agents accountable and what that process looks like. However, being that that's in Chapter 22, it falls outside the Planning Commission's responsibility, if you will. So we don't have those details for you all to consider tonight. Those will be brought to the board at a later date. But very much working with this topic and these items tonight to solve those issues that some people in our neighborhoods are having. So getting down to it now, first wanted to present the current definition for nightly rental in Chapter 94, which simply means a dwelling or portion thereof in which guest rooms are available to transient guests. So then within the uses part in Article 4, we are suggesting a modification. So this is our supplementary use standards for different uses. We list out hotels, nightly rentals, and timeshares under those supplementary uses, and we're proposing to add two particular regulations under the nightly rental. So these would be, along with the use being permitted in the same districts that it currently does, they would have to comply with these two regulations. The first one being that individual rooms within a single-family dwelling shall not be permitted, and the second one being that nightly rentals shall only be permitted within those planned developments which specifically list the use as being allowed. To go into further detail with that second point, we've had many planned developments over the history of the city, and they're very vague. Many of them are very vague. There are some that are not, but many are. And to the extent in their use of allowed uses, their list of allowed uses, they have statements along the lines of any use within the R3 district shall be allowed. Well, by default, then, that brings nightly rentals as being an allowed use. So there's been quite a bit of flexibility built into these planned developments. And that's caused concern for particularly the Hideaway Hills area. So what we're proposing is if a planned development wants to allow nightly rentals, that they have to have that specifically added to their list of uses, as nightly rental was not the same topic when those planned developments were approved as it is today. So for us to believe that they had taken that into consideration, we believe is a stretch. There are a couple of planned developments that do specifically mention it, which gives us even more support to this thought. Point Royale being the main one there, that a significant portion does allow nightly rental. As a result, staff recommends approval. Happy to answer any questions or go in these two regulations as you choose.
Thank you, Joel. Any of the commissioners have a comment or question for Joel at this point? Joel,
this is Commissioner Lloyd.
Yes.
And when there isn't an application for a special use permit and they put the opportunity to have nightly rentals, Joel, should we, instead of a large development, and you mentioned Point Royale, but if they were wanting to have the right to do this, shouldn't we designate a certain area within that special use that they can do this activity?
Within the planned developments, is that what you're referring to?
Yes, within the planned development, shouldn't we designate shouldn't we have them ask so we can approve yes or no on that it's going to be in this spot only in the planned development?
Yes, and that very much would be part of that process. So each plan development does include multiple graphics and multiple areas designated for different uses, and that would very much be part of that process. Any plan development coming back asking for nightly rentals to be an allowed use within it.
Okay.
Joel, how many plan developments do you think we have where nightly rental is going on, but it's not specifically listed in them? Are we talking 3, 4, 5, 6?
No, I really believe that the only one that comes to mind where it's not specifically listed and we're aware that it's occurring is the Hideaway Hills one.
Okay. Okay.
But this is Lloyd again. What, all right, like we were talking about the single family dwelling. So some bed and breakfasts were originally single family dwelling. How are we going to permit that, or how are we going to restrict that?
So the intent of that first regulation, individual rooms within a single family dwelling shall not be permitted. So that scenario is if you were to rent out one room in your house to somebody, to offer for rent one room in your house. This is proposed to not make that possible within the city of Branson. In a lot of urban areas, you could go to New York or Chicago or any major metropolitan and rent a room that's part of somebody's loft or home or what have you, and actually spend the night in their unit with them. And what we're proposing is for that not to be the case in Branson, not allowed in Branson.
So Joel, Commissioner Lloyd's question about bed and breakfast. So a bed and breakfast is actually considered a business, and a certain proportion of the house has to be allocated for that. How does that work?
Right. So bed and breakfast is a different use. It's very much falls under the commercial designation. So it is regulated under many of the commercial standards in the city of Branson, including business licenses and inspections, lodging inspections by the health department, and so on and so forth. Nightly rentals do not fall under the same guidelines and regulations that motels and hotels do.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Howden.
Yeah, Joel, help me with this. Aren't there times where we kind of want to consolidate the number of planned developments in our community?
I would love to have a magic wand and make them all go away, yes. But that's not possible.
Right. Sure, I understand. So would there ever be the case where we wanted to, eliminate a planned development, but for this type of use only being able to exist within a planned development, that we wouldn't eliminate it because of that? Right.
So we definitely have very similar how we've never gone down the road of involuntary annexation to clean up some of our islands. I can't picture a world where we would start zoning plan developments for people without their consent. We continually strive to work with property owners to try and eliminate plan developments, but that is the only road we're willing to go down with those at this point, unless you all or the Board of Aldermen direct us otherwise. So we'll continue to work with the existing plan developments and look for opportunities to reduce the number for sure. But we're not actively seeking to remove plan developments that do serve a purpose, and there are a handful that do provide a positive for the community.
So what would be the purpose for only allowing nightly rentals within that category of plan development?
I don't see a situation where someone would get a plan development only to allow nightly rentals, especially going forward. It would simply the reason we've added that as a regulation, a supplementary use standard, is so that it's very clear in those plan developments that their intent is to allow nightly rentals. Because right now it's very much the gray. We're connecting, far too many dots to allow that use. And we definitely rather it be black and white to know whether or not nightly rentals are truly allowed in a particular plan development over another.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question of Joel?
Yeah, Chair Harris.
Yes, Alderman C.
So the individual rooms within a single family dwelling should not be permitted to rent. So I know there's an incident that happened here in Branson where people thought they were renting the whole house when actually they were renting half of the lower level that consisted of 2 bedrooms. So then there was another group who rented the other 2 bedrooms on the lower, and then someone rented the whole upper. So you basically had 3 different parties in one single family residence. Is that a loophole, or is that allowed
Currently it is. That's why we're trying to propose this regulation to prevent that scenario from happening.
And it just so happens to be in that neighborhood of Hideaway Hills, not in that neighborhood, but very close. And I did do a drive-by one evening in the summer down where this was in question, where Alderman Skanes and Simmons, and it was quite the party. I can see how the neighbors would have been really upset with that.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have a question or comment of Joel?
Chairperson Harris?
Yes, Commissioner Howden.
So does this, because I know that the group that we're talking about has somewhat limited themselves to the activity on Tyler Street there, not necessarily the whole Hideaway Hills neighborhood. But is that, does it encompass the entire, subdivision of what we're talking about today?
So the planned development for Hideaway Hills is really just Tyler Street. It's not even the entirety of Tyler Street. It's just the first 2/3 off of Fall Creek Road, or I'm sorry, off of Rorick Valley Creek Road. But what we're talking about is not that particular neighborhood. That neighborhood just happened to be kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, to move this regulation forward. These very much are for effect of the entire community, not just a single area.
Sure, I get that, but part of the goal is that this will eliminate, this type of behavior that's not allowed on Tyler Street, essentially, right?
That's right. It will prohibit any new nightly rentals from being established on that street.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Some questions or comments of Joel? No? It looks like we have a municipal code amendment resolution. Let's see, Joel, did you receive any emails or comments from the public?
No, we did not.
You did not. Okay. It's resolution MC 21-1, which is request for municipal code amendments to chapter 94 zoning pertaining to nightly rentals. Chair would entertain a motion for approval. And then we'll have a vote.
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman C. Do we have a second?
I'll second Commissioner Lloyd.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second from Alderman C and Commissioner Lloyd. And any other comments or questions by the commissioners?
Commissioner Harris?
Yes, Commissioner Pinkley.
I'd just like to thank Joel and staff for working, and Alderman Simmons and Skanes for pushing this. And I think it's really needed, and I appreciate the staff working as hard as they did to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pinkley. Anyone else? Then Jake, would you have a call roll for us for the vote, please?
Thank you. Open vote. Chairperson Harris,
Yes.
Commissioner Richards,
Yes.
Alderman C,
Yes.
Commissioner Howden,
Yes.
Commissioner Pinkley,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Lloyd, or excuse me, Commissioner Lloyd,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Davis.
Yes.
Closed vote. Motion is carried.
Thank you. 7-0. Thank you, commissioners. That, I believe, takes care of all of our public hearing items. Joel, do you have any comments or questions or reports you wish to speak to us about?
No, nothing to share of note, just that we're working on the theater parking topic and hope to have that to you all the next month. And, as Commissioner or Vice Chairperson Davis brought up, we should be able to pull something together pretty quickly on the shelter care facility topic so we can at least discuss it as well next month.
Perfect. Thank you. Any of the commissioners have any general comments or questions at this time?
I had just a general question for Joel.
Yes, Commissioner Pinkley.
Thank you. Joel, and this isn't really relevant, but I wanted to bring it up now regarding the shelter item that we discussed earlier. There was a requirement in there for parking, and I thought that that was something that we didn't apply anymore.
Yeah, we just require, we have a maximum parking requirement. That's right.
But I did see that in there specifically for that facility, and I was just curious about that because I didn't know that we were requiring a maximum at that level.
Yeah, we'll pull that out and revisit that as well for next month and take a look at that, and it'll be a good chance to review that and make sure that those all are lined up in good order too.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Hearing none, then the chair would entertain a motion for adjournment from tonight's Planning Commission meeting.
So move. Davis?
Davis, thank you. We have a second.
Second.
Second, Alderman C, thank you. All right, Jake, one more time, if you would call open vote roll for us, please, for adjourning this evening.
Open vote to adjourn. Commissioner Harris,
Yes.
Commissioner Richards,
Yes.
Alderman C,
Yes.
Commissioner Howden,
Yes.
Commissioner Pinkley,
Yes.
Commissioner Lloyd,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Davis.
Yes.
Close vote. Motion is carried.
Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you for the staff that were watching and helping, even though we didn't talk to all of you. We appreciate you all being here. And have a good evening and be safe.